Up last week, I say finished up, of answering the question that was asked from 1 Corinthians 7 on from verse 15 and then following about remaining in the state in which you called. We talked a whole lot about sexual immorality. We talked about, of course, fornication and adultery and on marriage. And I just kind of wanted, I got to thinking about that. I didn't want to just leave it like that. So I thought tonight we would talk about how to maybe make our marriages strong so that's not an issue. We talked a lot about our thinking, of how we think about things from society or whatever the case may be, where we get our instruction sometimes when it comes to marriage. And that influences a lot of how we think in marriage and how we act and the things that we do. And that's a shame because really the only instruction we need is what's from God's Word, because He's the one that instituted it, and we need to make sure we're following that. So I'd just like to talk tonight maybe about just about that, about marriage, maybe strengthening our marriage, how to keep temptation out of our marriage, and maybe some things that we can make some practical applications, since we talked a lot the last several weeks, and I always like to make sure we're applying it to our lives, that it can be useful to us, and hopefully that's what we can do tonight. But when it comes to temptation, it's not something that just happens to other people. I always say a lot that when it comes to marriage, that's one thing that doesn't tip me. But I'm not naive and to the point where I understand that, as the Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5 and 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is walking around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. I was listening to a lesson just not too long ago. There's nothing fit on the radio anymore, and I've gone through all of the books that I've got through that Libby app for a little while, and I don't know what to look for now, so I've been listening to podcasts and sermons and things like this, and someone had a take on 1 Peter 5 and 8 that I've not really thought about before, and it's about us, of course, being vigilant. Means we need to be on guard, sober, clear thinking, that your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion. I've always thought about this passage as Satan, hiding and waiting, and he's waiting for that weakest of the herd to come by, and that's how I always described it, and that's how I always picture it in my mind, that he's waiting for that weakest one to come through and just snatch. That's why we got to be so much on guard. But when you think about a roaring lion, I'm not so sure that that's how a lion acts. A roaring lion walks through the jungle like he's the king and he can do whatever he wants. He don't think there's any problem whatsoever getting any animal that he wants. So when we think about how Satan tempts us and what Satan does, he doesn't have any regard. He's so prideful, because that was his problem, that he thinks he can get us at any time. You think about the conversation he had with God about Job. He told God, well, of course he's going to serve you. You built a hedge around him. You let me at him, and I guarantee you he'll fall. You remember when he tempted Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, if you be the Son of God, turn these stones to bread, mocking him. I mean, he's pretty brazen. So when you think about Satan as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, Luke chapter 22, remember what Jesus said about Satan when it come to Peter? He's asked for you, as he's going to sift you as wheat. And when you return to me, so return to me implies what? Satan got him for a little while, didn't he? So Satan has he doesn't mince words, or he doesn't think that he can't get us. So I'm not naive to what Satan tries. And he's going to try every avenue that he can. So when it comes to our marriage, we need to practice this. We need to be sober. We need to be vigilant. We need to make sure there's things in place that we make sure that we're fighting against Satan every turn we make. That we're always sober, that we're always vigilant, that we're always doing what we can to be on guard. And then that goes back to Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Marriage is not a human invention. It's God's creation. It's a covenant. It's something that God holds dear. So if God instituted it, God created it, God has a plan for how it's intended to be, with still knowing that Satan is out there to tempt, God is not going to leave it to chance. He's going to give us all the tools necessary that we can have a marriage that God wants us to have, that God commands us to have if we're married. He said, this is how you're supposed to be. And if we follow that, and that's where you come into trouble, is when we stop following God's word, we stop following God's plan. It's just like in the church. When we go against how God organized it, when we go against how God set it up and its structure, it's not going to be what He intended. It's not going to be as great as He could, and it could be just wrong. So we can't change from the pattern in which God sets. He tells us again, husbands and wives are one flesh, both spiritually, emotionally, physically. And that's, as we talked about for several weeks, that's a relationship that is it excludes every other thing. You know, that relationship between a husband and wife needs to be different than we have anywhere else. I mean, think about how we communicate or how we interact with individuals. It can go from, we have all kinds of different interactions. If you pass somebody on the road in Jackson County, what's going to happen? You may get 2 fingers, you may get a wave, may get 1 finger. But what does that say? Can you communicate that way? What does that tell somebody? You're going to have a whole conversation with just this, can't you? Just like I used to say, Hannah and I used to have a whole conversation every morning before we went to work by going, And that's it. Knew exactly what we meant. That was a whole conversation. So we communicate in different ways, right? So we have that kind of communication. We communicate with co-workers and just acquaintances that we have around by, asking questions or getting factual information, whatever the case may be. And then, we have to where we have this interaction with our congregation. We have fellowships, we have retreats, we have all kinds of things that we fellowship. Why? So we can grow closer, so we can know all that we can about each other, right? So we have those relationships. We have friend relationships to where, you may be closer to this individual than you are to anybody else that's around. You may share things or experiences or whatever the case may be. And then you have that relationship with your spouse. And that relationship with the spouse should be a relationship to where, you have a kind of intimacy that you don't have anywhere else. And I'm not talking just physical. I mean, it's a relationship to where you should have the freedom to communicate that you can't communicate anywhere else, or you shouldn't communicate anywhere else. You shouldn't be sharing things with somebody else that you wouldn't share with your spouse. That's where some things kind of go awry. But you should have the freedom to do that. You should have the freedom to be able to express yourself and tell your spouse things that you wouldn't tell anybody else, that you can tell them and they won't do something to hurt you or say something to hurt you or they'll encourage you. They won't, you can trust them with your words. You can trust them with who you are. And that's how that marriage relationship is supposed to be. That's why it is so close. That's why nobody else, remember we've talked about that circle before. Nobody else gets in that circle. Just you, your spouse, and God. Nobody else is in that circle. And that's the relationship that you have to work at. That's the relationship that you have to do something and be sober and be vigilant at, as 1 Peter 5 and 8 says, not just to ward off Satan, but to make sure you're doing things so Satan can't get in. You don't have any chinks in that armor. You're putting on that whole armor of God that protects, us when it comes to our faith. Well, we're doing the same thing when it comes to our marriages. We do that so Satan can't get in that armor. that he don't find any chinks in it, because he's going to be brave, brazen enough that he thinks he can just come in and do anything he wants to do. And we have to make sure that we know that he can't. Don't let him fool you that he can. We know that he can't unless we let him. That's the key to it. When we let him, then he's going to have free reign. That's why you don't crack that door just a little bit. He won't take that. He's going to bust it wide open. So we got to make sure the door stays closed when it comes to that. So why, and I guess I thought about this question as I was thinking about this. What reason, there's never a reason. What excuse do people give for infidelity? I know what some individuals have told me before. Why do you think somebody does that? What do you think some reasons is for that? Oh, I've hit the third rail now, haven't I? Nobody's going to say anything. I've got some. You think about, I heard somebody tell me one time, well, that's just going to give my in this case it was her husband, a wake-up call. Give them a wake-up call. Well, they've been in a rut. Things has just kind of been going on. This kind of gives a wake-up call. Maybe they'll start paying more attention to me. Is that an excuse? Does that work?
It's a terrible
Huh?
one. I said it's a terrible
one. Oh, yeah, it's a terrible one. Any excuse would be a terrible one, because there's absolutely no reason. There's not one reason somebody could ever come and talk to me about. As a minister, they say, here's the reason I did for it. And I would say, that's a good reason. There's never a good reason. Now, there may have been circumstances around that they thought it was, but it's never a good reason. That's never the answer. But some may say, well, I gave them a wake-up call. Some may say, well, it was just something exciting. This kind of goes along with it. We got in a rut. This is just something, just the allure of it, the secrecy of it, just that something, it was something exciting about it. Or they may say, well, it was a friendship that got out of control. This probably happens a lot. Got to talking to this person too much, or I made some old acquaintances that I had, or me and a coworker got too close. Whatever the case may be, they say, well, we got to a point I didn't expect. I actually had somebody say that not too long ago in a situation. They said, well, it's not like it happened just over time, like it was just a friendship that grew. Well, I don't see why either one would make a difference, but that's just some of the excuses that somebody might give. But what would be the reasons, and they're good ones, to not do it? I mean, that's really what you have to think about, isn't it? You have to think about, go into each one. People like to have lists of pros and cons. Okay, here's the pro side. It's this, this, and this, which amounts to nothing when you think about it. And then here's the reasons not to. Well, let's think about this. If you look in Exodus 20 and 14, can you pull that up there, Brian? This ought to be just simple enough. And then somebody may say, well, we're not under the 10 Commandments anymore. But are we still under this? Thou shalt not commit adultery? I mean, that was one of the top 10 from the very beginning, wasn't it? This shows you, when you start thinking about the importance that God places on marriage, this was when He gave the law that He was, building a nation. This was top 10 here. This was one of the 10, one of the top ones. So when you think about reasons not to, this ought to be at the top of our list also. If you look in Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10, it says, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. It was something that, let me just say this. How much of that would go on if this was still practiced today? What's that? Be a lot of dead people. Yeah, I guess, how else could you say it? I mean, if you thought this is going to, I can be put to death for this. This is how serious this is. I'll just leave that one right there. I could say too much about that one, but we'll just leave that one right there. Look in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7. I'm making Brian do this on the fly tonight because I didn't know sure which verses I was going to use. If you look in Romans chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, Brian, if you don't mind. It says, "For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. So if then, while her husband lives, she marries another man, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another." So does this tell us again what God's law is for marriage? Until death. That's how he intends it. You do something for that, it was worthy of death. So you start looking at these reasons not to. I can't stress enough how important this is, but it goes back to viewing how we think about marriage. So go ahead, Parker.
It's also not just physically, but it's also what's in the heart, as it says in Matthew 5:27.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, you talking about a man looketh on a woman, lusteth after her, commit adultery. Yeah, we can have a lesson on that, and that may be another question we're going to do. It has to be the physical act, but there's problems with it being in the heart too, and knowing exactly what lusting after her in the heart is. It's not just, oh, that's an attractive person. It's actually that lust in which, as James describes, that we're tempted. And well, let's just go to that. James chapter 1. That's a good point, Parker. James chapter 1, begin at verse 14. It says, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by" what? "His own desires." This tells us a little something about temptation. Temptation is unique to each of us. It's unique in a way that what tempts you may not tempt me, and what tempts me may not tempt you. But in the context that we're talking about, how it starts, all of it starts is that when we're drawn away by our own desires and enticed, when it's not just a thought anymore, it starts being planned out within us to have an action. And then go on just a little farther, if you don't mind. It says, "Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." So it starts out as this desire, my own temptation that I have, and it starts enticing me, and I start thinking about that. And then what happens? Then when it has conceived, it gives birth to sin. So what happens? When that desire becomes that action, that's when it becomes sin. And it's just like everything else that Jesus taught. And here's the thing. When it comes to adultery, when it comes to fornication, either fornication or when you're married and then adultery, when it comes to it, it's not about stopping before the act. It's about taking care of the thought so it don't lead to the act. Don't dwell on the thought. That's how you make a great marriage. That you're not thinking elsewhere. Your thought is not on your spouse, on that other person who you become one with. That realizing your body is not your own, their body is not their own, so you're taking care of that person, and you're making sure that you're preferring that person. As Ephesians says, for the husband, you love them just like Christ loved the church. When you're doing that, you don't have place for this. That's what you're concentrating on. But when you stop concentrating on that, this starts taking over. See, it's about this thought process. And it comes down to, I've got to continuously check my heart. I've got to check my heart till, actually this is one of the points, but it fits right here, so we're just going to go to it. I've got to check my heart and see, am I sharing more with an individual of the opposite sex than I should? That's a heart check there. Because if I am, there's some reason I'm not doing that with my spouse. I've quit thinking here and I've started thinking here. Somebody started showing me more attention. Somebody is listening to me. I mean, it can be emotional most of the time to begin with, I would say. And that falls on both of the spouses to make sure you're fulfilling those emotional needs that your spouse has. That goes back to communication. But it's checking the heart. Am I spending more time doing this?
I have a question about the Leviticus and Exodus passage where what would be considered adultery when they had multiple wives? Was it just strictly if the woman already had a husband at that point when they had multiple wives?
Well, any time it's adultery, it's with, then you're getting in what God tolerated through Moses, or he didn't when it come to certificates of divorce and things, or they had wives and then they had concubines and things of this nature. How that specifically applies, are you asking how did they choose when it was adultery? Was it adultery if they was with their third wife and they're married to three of them?
Yeah, if he's married to one wife and then he, have subsequent wives after, when does it become adultery in that law, I guess?
I'll be honest, I've never thought about that. We'll write that down as a question. I'm curious about that one myself, because you can get into what God approved and didn't approve of, in the Old Testament. Even when Jesus went back and said, here's what, took place.
Well, the Bible says that there was a time when God winked and said, if this dick.
Yeah, Acts 17 and 11. 17. Yeah, 17, what is it, 17:30? Once this time of ignorance God winked at, but now command men everywhere to repent. And yeah, that's true, but I don't know that answers the question you're at. How did they view that if they had a multiplicity of wives?
I'm wondering with the Leviticus one, it was saying took a wife that had a husband.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's what it was. If she was already with a husband, then that would be considered the adultery part of it.
Yeah. Even Jesus under the old law recognized the woman at the well of having five, and the one she had wasn't hers. I don't know, that's a good question. That's a real good question. Let me think on that. I don't know if I can give you, I know I can give you what I think, but I don't know that that'd be a good answer. So can I put a pin in that one? Okay. That's a good question, though. I appreciate it. You start applying these, because the marriage law was universal. It didn't matter, because when God put it in place, it wasn't just for the Jews or just the Gentiles to begin with. It was for all mankind. And then that goes back to how the law applied when it come to wives like that. So that's a good question. That's a good question. I'm sorry, I don't have a top of my head answer for you just yet on that one. I'll be honest, I've not actually thought about that before. But I will think about that. What were we talking about?
If in your search, Exodus 21:10 might help you a little bit when you're looking at the answer.
21:10, Exodus 21:10.
And you may have to read a few verses before and after. It kind of
Right.
sets out a law of, this is acceptable kind of if you have multiple wives. You'll probably start at maybe 8
Yeah.
through 12. You can pull them all up. It's not necessarily written out extremely clear.
Okay, if he takes another wife, let's see. She does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people. You couldn't even sell your wife once you got divorced? Okay. Since he has dealt deceitfully with her, if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not.
Verse 10 is basically saying, if you take another wife, you shall
Yeah.
not diminish the first wife that was given to you by marriage. And so it's pretty much saying, hey, here's the rule for if you're going to have two wives. That's how you're going to treat them.
Yeah. And I guess it would go back to what, under kind of how they were doing with divorce, is when that on the Exodus would probably apply. If I had to just think about that a minute.
If you combine that with the other verse looked at, it almost seems like adultery is if you're taking a married wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're taking a single wife, yeah, you may have multiples, but it's not necessarily, it is, but it's a little different. It is a little different.
Yeah, I tell you, there's some things you can weed through when it comes into the Old Testament, when it comes to that, and I don't like to use that phrase, that God stomached, and even through Moses that he did. But as Jesus said, it wasn't so from the beginning. So there's some things I think to sort through when it comes to that to give a good, clear answer on that. Back to James. Yeah, is that where it was? Actually, go to Proverbs 4 and 3. Proverbs 4 and 3. Yeah. When I was my father's son, that's not what I wanted. What did I want? 4 and 23. I'm sorry. 4 and 23. Sorry. It says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issue of life. Issues of life. And that's true, isn't it? You want to know what a person truly is. If you want to know what they do, it comes from the heart. And it's what a person dwells on and thinks about. I'm going to be careful not generalize, because all I base it on is what I've witnessed or individuals that have come to me in counseling and said. But it doesn't ever seem to me that it ever just spontaneously happens. I think it happens over time, and then this spontaneously happens because of these other events that have took place to begin with. And that's what Jesus taught all the way through the Sermon on the Mount is making sure you're keeping your heart in check, your attitude, what your motives are, these types of things. You make sure that you are doing these things because I heard someone else say this too. I didn't think this, but I thought it was right. They was talking about marriage and saying, before you get married, it's about your feelings, because you feel something about someone, and then you do something. You marry them, and because you feel a certain way about them. And as you get into marriage, it reverses. It's the action that comes before the feelings. You start doing things so you can experience a feeling. You do certain things for your wife, or your wife does certain things for the husband, little things, whatever it may be. That way, it produces a feeling. That may be their love language. Saying good things, bringing flowers, doing the laundry. Whatever it may be. It's actions that you do to produce a feeling. And I've thought about that. I've been thinking about that for the last few days, and that's true. You do things because. I don't want to say because it's what you're supposed to do, because that's what you want to do. That's what you should do for your spouse. That's what you should want to do. That way, you're doing things that keeps these other thoughts from coming in. That way, And what if they do? I mean, what if communication breaks down and you're not communicating like you should, or you get in a rut, as some people say that they do, and one spouse is not feeling like their needs are being met physically or emotionally? Well, what's the plan then? Cut and run? Well, actually, people don't want to cut and run. They want to have fun and come back, I guess. That's never made any sense to me. But, what do you do then? You start working on those areas. You realize that. It takes work. It's not something that's easy to do. Is it 1 Peter? Let me think about this. I just thought of a verse. I don't even know if I've got it wrote down. 1 Peter 3. I think that's where it is. Where is it where it talks about, gives a whole list of how wives are with husbands? And is this it? 1 Peter 3. Wives likewise submit to your own husbands, that even some do not obey in word, that without the word, they want to keep on going down. Maybe about verse 7. Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding. Yeah. Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, talking about their wives, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. What does that mean? Dwell with them with understanding. Some version says with knowledge.
The version I'm using says, live with your wives in an understanding way.
In an understanding way, with knowledge. What do you think that means? Is Yeah, treat each other like you want to be treated. Is there some things that we need instruction to do, and is there some things that we just naturally know to do? I mean, really think about that when it comes to doing good things or caring in such a way. It's like when it tells the older women to teach the young women to do what? Love their husbands. How do you teach love? Can you teach that? You can if it's just a feeling, but it's not just a feeling. So there's things here with understanding is I've got knowledge. God gives me instructions on how to do it. My wife can give me instructions on how to do it, can't she? I can give her instructions on how to dwell with me. You know, this is a shock, but I'm not the easiest person to live with. So, I mean, think about this though. Can I help with that? I absolutely can help with that. You know, it tells husbands to love their wives, to honor their wives. It tells wives to respect their husbands. Let me ask you this. Have you ever one time asked your spouse how you can do that for them? Wives, have you ever asked your husband, how can I show you respect? Husband, have you ever asked your wife, how do you want me to show you love? And why do you think, I may ask this in our parenting class because we went over some things in our parenting class, but why do you think it's written that way? It tells husbands love their wives and it tells wives to respect their husbands. Why do you think it's different? What's that? Yeah, respect. Do you think respect may mean something or a man may appreciate respect more? In the aspect of who he is and the lifestyle that he lives, like even at work, do we need respect? And I'm not saying women don't either, but I just think it's interesting how the Bible words this. Respect is a big thing. Disrespect is a big thing. You know, when it comes to a male's feelings. And love is shown in a lot of different ways too. I mean, you put all this together, it's about strengthening your marriage by finding out what each other wants and what each other needs. So you're making sure that you're fulfilling that, as the Bible tells us. You know, go out of your way to outserve the other one. You know, you're not keeping score, but you've got things on your mind. I mean, I think about just myself. I'm an affirmation person. Is that how you say that? You know, I like a little text every now and again. I think, my wife's thinking about me, or a note, or that's just, you know, that's my mind. You know, and I try to think of little things that I can do. You know, and there may be little things, but you think about all these little things. You know what that tells your spouse? I was thinking about you at that moment. I don't have to be with you to think about you, but I was thinking about you during this time. Or this. I even heard, this has been several years ago, someone said, you know, if you ever find yourself in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, or somebody is talking to you of the opposite sex makes you uncomfortable, you know, and you're married, right then say something positive about your spouse. No matter what it is. You say, well, that may sound, and I thought about that too. I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. You know, you're letting, one, you're breaking that situation up, but two, you're letting that person know, not only am I married, you don't have to ask if I'm happily married. Because now it doesn't matter if you're married. They go, are you happily married? You know, it's about, yeah, if I'm married, I'm happily married. And here's, you know, you're protecting your marriage. That's what it's about. Protect your marriage. Do everything you can to put that dome around it to protect it at all times. Put boundaries, rules. Well, I say rules, you know, things that you think, you know, I've got rules as a minister that I've always put forth. I don't meet with any ladies in a room by myself. I don't, I make sure to have these, but there's things we should have as spouses too. Just so I know that roaring lion is out there, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure he knows he can't get me. That I'm putting up all the barriers that I can. But if I'm just walking out there and thinking, I don't have to give this a second thought whatsoever, then what's going to happen? Well, your marriage isn't what it should be because you're not giving a second thought to your marriage. It's not about just defending against the temptation. It's about providing that and nurturing that foundation so there's not that temptation there. Because we're all tempted by different things, so that shouldn't be one of them. If what our marriages is what it should be, why would it be a temptation? So we need to test our heart. We need to make sure that we're not doing things that can kind of crack that door open, and just make sure that we're not. But again, how do we do that? Make sure that we're putting effort on everything that we're doing. Ecclesiastes 4:12. You may not think this applies, but I think it does. It says, though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a 3/4 cord is not quickly broken. What is the whole essence he's talking about there? You make this cord, you make something that's so strong that something can't break it. And that's exactly what God does for marriage. And that's how it's tended. We're supposed to make it so strong that it can't be broken. But again, that takes work. We can't be like someone said, I told my wife I loved her when I married her. If I change my mind, I'll tell her one day. You know, it can't be that kind of attitude. It has to be where you're putting forth that effort, that you're showing that. God so loved the world, what? How do I know? How do we know God loves us? Because of what He does, right? I can trust Him. That's how we know our spouse, that my spouse knows that I love them. That's how I know that my spouse loves me, because it's what we do. It's not about a feeling. We're doing things now to create those feelings. You know, I just have to be honest. I get a smile on my face when I can't say every time, because sometimes it's Facebook Marketplace pictures I get of having to go get something in the woods somewhere, you know. So I can't say a smile every time I get a text when I see a name on there, but most of the time I do. I will say that. But I'll tell you this, most of the time I'll go get it, you know. I may drive 50 miles for something that costs $3, but, you know, you do it, right? Because it was a good deal and that's what we needed at the time. And then sometimes put down there for the grandkids. That's a given. It don't matter what it is after that. All you got to do is put for the grandkids. We'll drive 50 miles to go get it. But you see the point I'm trying to make. And I'm not saying that I do, that my marriage is greater than anything else, or that I'm greater or anything like that. It's just about, you know, you got to think about things. You got to make sure that you're putting forth the effort. I don't feel like putting forth the effort all the time. Do you? Of course we don't. That goes back to that 50-50 rule. It can't be just 50-50, because you don't always feel the same every day. Some days it's harder than others. Sometimes you have a bad day and the other one has to take up the slack. But that's what marriage is. It's about giving. You know, it's not giving and taking, it's giving. That's what it's about. And we've got to work hard on it. So I wanted to just kind of talk about this tonight, just to make sure that we're not just talking about the negatives of everything. There won't be the negative if we focus on the positive. You know, if we're teaching our kids how important it is, and then when marriage does occur, if it occurs, then it's going to be something special. It's going to be exactly what God intended it to be, how God organized it, just like the church is supposed to be. It's a beautiful thing if we do it the way the Creator meant for it to be. And that's what we have to do. That's when it comes to follow them by knowledge. So do all that you can. You know, you know, in our society, there's all kinds of questions that arise about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And I think all that wouldn't be an issue if we just do the right kind of preaching and teaching on marriage, of what it's really like, what you really have to put forth, that it's, you know, it's work, it's doing it with knowledge, doing it with God's knowledge, not what somebody in society says or some therapist says out here. You know, think about yourself, and it's all about you, and that's what it becomes now. It's no longer, as a Christian, it's not about us anyway. We give up that. We sacrifice ourselves daily, so it's not about us, ever about us. So when it comes to Christian marriages, especially, well, all marriages, because the marriage rule applies, it's not about us anymore. It's about that other person. You made a vow. You made a promise that I'm going to love you till death. And it's not about just the feelings. So I guess the easiest way to do it is show your spouse that you like them. Is there a difference? You know, it's like spouses tell you sometimes, God said I had to love you, doesn't mean I have to like you, and right now you need to walk away from me, you know. Show them that you like them, that you're friends, that you want to spend time with them, you know. That it's not just about, okay, we're just companions until death now, I guess. You know, it's about that you enjoy your time together, but work at that time and be the marriage that God wants you to be. Any final thoughts?